Hey guys, tonight we are heading way back in time to an era of soaring cathedrals and brutal, muddy reality. We're going on a crusade, but forget the shining armor and the epic charges you see in movies. We're going to focus on something far more fundamental. Something that dictated life and death more than any sword or shield: the food. Or more accurately, the almost complete lack of it. We're going to explore what it was actually like to be on a 2,000-mile armed pilgrimage where the supply chain was basically just hope. And the menu often consisted of things you wouldn't feed to your worst enemy's dog. You'll feel the gnawing emptiness in your stomach, the grittiness of worm-eaten bread, and the desperation that drives a man to look at his own leather shoes and wonder how they'd taste in a soup. And let's be brutally honest here. Your modern palate and stomach would not last a week. You, with your appreciation for non-weevil-based protein and water that hasn't been shared with a dozen pack animals, would probably tap out before you even left your own country, brought low by a piece of suspiciously off-color salted pork. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a tiny click for you that makes a huge difference for this little corner of YouTube. And as always, I'd love to see where you're all watching from tonight. Drop your city or country and the local time in the comments below. It's always incredible to see our global community of history buffs settling in for the night. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your world is small, contained by the rolling fields and dense forests of your corner of France. Your life is governed by the seasons and the church bell. You wake in a cramped, smoky cottage that you share with your family, and in the winter, probably a goat. Your hands are hard and calloused from a life of back-breaking labor, coaxing crops from your small strip of land, a tiny piece of a lord's vast fiefdom. Your diet is a monotonous rotation of dark. Coarse bread, a thin porridge of oats or barley called pottage, and, on a good day, some cheese or an onion. Meat is a rare luxury, something you might taste at Easter or Christmas. Life is hard, short, and uncertain. You fear famine, you fear disease, and you fear the wrath of God. And it is the fear of God and the promise of His favor that changes everything. A man arrives in your village. He is not a local priest, he is a preacher, a man on fire with a holy purpose. His eyes burn with conviction, and his voice, though cracked and hoarse from shouting in a dozen other village squares, rings with an authority that silences the crowd. He speaks of a great call from the Pope himself, a man in a faraway city called Rome. He speaks of the Holy Land, a place of myth and legend where Christ himself walked, and he tells you that this sacred land is in the hands of the infidel. He paints a vivid, horrifying picture. Christian pilgrims, he says, are being robbed, tortured, and killed. The Holy Sepulchre, the very tomb of Christ, is being defiled. As he speaks, a wave of outrage and piety ripples through the assembled villagers. This is a direct assault on your world, on your faith. The preacher then speaks of the Pope's promise, a spiritual reward of almost unimaginable value, a plenary indulgence. Undertake this holy journey, this armed pilgrimage to free Jerusalem, and all your sins will be forgiven. All of them. The years of petty theft, of lies, of quiet blasphemies you muttered when the harvest failed, all washed clean. It is a direct ticket to heaven for a man like you, whose life is a daily struggle with the threat of damnation. This is a staggering offer. But there is more. The preacher speaks of the East as a land of fabulous wealth, a land of milk and honey, ripe for the taking. He hints that for men with no land and no prospects here in an overcrowded Europe, there are fortunes to be made, lands to be won. Historians still debate the primary motivation for the average crusader. Was it pure religious piety and the desire to free Jerusalem? Or were economic factors land shortages in Europe? The hope for plunder and an escape from feudal obligations a more significant driver for the common man. Standing there in the mud of your village square, listening to this fiery messenger, you don't separate the two. In your mind, they are intertwined. To serve God and better your station, what could be more perfect? It is a holy calling and a golden opportunity, all in one. You are swept up in the fervor. You see your neighbors, men you have known your whole life. Step forward. You see a local knight, his face grim and determined. You see a man who owes debts to half the village. You see a younger son with no inheritance to look forward to. And you see yourself. You step forward, and with a trembling voice, you take the vow, Deus Vult. God wills it. The cry is taken up by the crowd. The preacher produces a pair of scissors and a bolt of red cloth. He cuts a strip and fashions a cross, which he pins to your rough-spun tunic. You have taken the cross. You are now a cruci signatus, one signed by the cross. You are a pilgrim, a warrior of Christ. The decision feels momentous, glorious, and now you must prepare for the journey. This is where the glorious, abstract ideal crashes into hard. Practical reality? You are going on a journey of more than 2,000 miles, through lands you do not know, to a place you can barely imagine, and you have to feed yourself along the way. Your concept of logistics is non-existent. You are a peasant. Your longest journey has probably been a 2-day trip to the regional market town. The Holy Land might as well be the moon. You begin to plan, and your planning is a study in profound, catastrophic naivety. You look at your worldly possessions. There is the small hovel you call home. Your family's strip of land, a bony ox, a few tools, and not much else. To finance this expedition, it must all go. You sell your right to farm your strip of land back to the Lord's Reeve. You sell your ox to a wealthier neighbor. You sell your tools. You gather a pitifully small pile of silver coins, which you guard with your life. This is your war chest, your supply fund. You have now cut all ties to your old life. There is no coming back from this. You will reach Jerusalem, or you will die trying. Now! What to pack the knights and great lords, you hear, are organizing their own forces. They will have wagons, servants, and organized supplies. But you are not part of that. You are part of the great, disorganized mass of common folk, the so-called People's Crusade. You are on your own, so you think about food. What lasts you? You go to your family's meager stores. You take a sack and fill it with dried beans and peas. They are hard as rocks, but they don't rot. You take another sack and fill it with the coarse, dark flour from your last harvest. You can make bread on the road. You think. Your mother gives you a wheel of hard cheese, a rare treasure, which you wrap carefully in cloth. You have a side of salted pork, hanging in the smoky rafters of your cottage. It's been curing for the better part of a year. You eye it with cautious optimism. You figure it's either perfectly preserved or has achieved sentience and will be a formidable foe in its own right. You cut off a large chunk and add it to your bundle. You have a water skin, made from a goat's bladder. You fill it with water, not thinking that this one skin will be laughably inadequate. You have a single cooking pot, a knife, and a wooden bowl. You look at your pile of provisions, a sack of beans, a sack of flour, some cheese, and a lump of salty, questionable meat. It seems like a lot of food. It feels substantial. You've packed enough to last for weeks, maybe even a month. The journey to Jerusalem, you've heard, is just a bit further than that. Probably, the sheer scale of the geographical and logistical challenge ahead is simply beyond your comprehension. Your local priest gives you a final blessing. He gives you a pilgrim's scrip, a small leather pouch on a long strap. To be worn over your shoulder, it is a symbol of your holy vow. This small bag, an obscure but essential part of the pilgrim's identity, was meant for carrying the alms you receive, and perhaps a day's worth of bread. It was never intended to be the primary luggage for a multi-year military campaign. It is a symbol of your reliance on Christian charity along the way, a reliance that will soon be stretched to its breaking point and beyond. The day of departure arrives. It is not a somber affair. It is charged with a strange, festive piety. The whole village turns out. There is a final mass in the small stone church. The priest blesses you and the other men from the village who have taken the cross. Your mother weeps, pressing a small wooden cross she has carved into your hand. Your father, a man of few words, claps you on the shoulder. His eyes filled with a mixture of pride and fear. You say your goodbyes. You join a growing stream of people on the road. It is not an army. It is a migration. There are a few knights on horseback, their squires trotting alongside. But mostly, it is people like you, peasants, townsfolk, whole families who have abandoned their homes. Women and children are mixed in with the men. They carry bundles on their backs, or push crude handcarts loaded with their possessions. The mood is optimistic, even joyous. People are singing hymns. They are pilgrims on the road to God's holy city. They are the chosen. You fall in with a group from your region. The first few days are almost pleasant. You're traveling through your own lands. The weather is mild. At night, you make a fire, and someone who brought a small lute plays a tune. You cook some of your beans in your pot, sharing with a man who has only flour. Hai, in turn, shares the flat. Dense bread he bakes on a hot stone by the fire. You feel a sense of comradeship, of shared holy purpose. You are the church militant. On the move. You learn that in these early stages, through familiar Christian lands. You can rely on the charity of the church at the end of a long day's walk. You might arrive at a monastery. The monks, seeing the crosses on your tunics, will often provide a simple meal, more pottage, more dark bread, and a safe place to sleep in a barn. This reinforces your belief that God will provide. You are on his mission, and he will surely not let his soldiers starve. This comfortable illusion persists for a few weeks. You are making your way across France, heading east, but your personal provisions are dwindling at an alarming rate. The sack of flour is half empty. The great chunk of salted pork is now a small knob. The cheese is long gone. The silver coins you got from selling your life's work are disappearing, spent in towns along the way on a loaf of bread or a handful of onions, where prices are suddenly 3 times what they should be. The locals, it seems, have quickly learned that a captive audience of thousands of hungry pilgrims is a fine business opportunity. The charity of the monasteries begins to wear thin as well. They are used to supporting a handful of peaceful pilgrims a week, not a river of thousands of armed, hungry men, women, and children pouring past their gates every single day. The monks' initial piety gives way to a strained, fearful prudence. The barn doors are barred. The food handouts become smaller, then stop altogether. The mood of the great host begins to change. The hymns become less frequent. The optimism begins to curdle into a grim, anxious resolve. The gnawing feeling in your stomach, once a distant worry, is becoming a constant companion. You look at your remaining handful of beans, at the nearly empty sack of flour, and you look at the long, long road ahead. For the first time, a cold sliver of doubt pierces your pious fervor. God may will it, but he has, it seems, entirely neglected to arrange the catering. Your journey, and your education in the brutal realities of hunger, has only just begun. The small sack of beans is empty. You turned it upside down and shook it this morning, and only a few sad crumbs of dust fell out. The last piece of your mother's hard cheese was gone a week ago, a memory of rich, salty flavor that now feels like a dream. And the flour you used to bake dents, gritty little cakes on a hot stone by the fire, that ran out yesterday. You ate the last one slowly, mechanically, trying to make it last. But it turned to ash in your mouth and vanished into the gnawing emptiness of your stomach. your personal provisions, the carefully packed supplies that were meant to sustain you on your holy journey, are gone. You have been on the road for just over a month. The Holy Land is still a world away. The host, this great, shambling river of humanity, has become a moving city, and like any city, it has a marketplace. But it is a marketplace of pure desperation. The few merchants who dare to travel with the column, and the local vendors who see you coming, have become masters of extortion. That small pile of silver coins you got for selling your entire former life. It is nearly gone. A coin that could have fed your family for a week back home now buys you a single. Small loaf of bread, and it's stale at that. You see a man trade a good wool blanket for a handful of dried figs. You see a woman offer her only cooking pot for a small bag of oats. The economy of the Crusade is a brutal one, and you are on the losing end of it. Your status has changed. You are no longer a pilgrim, a holy warrior traveling through friendly lands. In the eyes of the local people you pass, you are now a pest, a plague. They see you coming, a swarm of tens of thousands of hungry mouths, and they lock their doors, hide their livestock, and bury their grain. The initial curiosity and piety they might have shown to the first wave of crusaders has been replaced by a deep, fearful hostility. You're starting to get the feeling that the "we're here to save Christendom" message is getting lost in translation. The locals' body language seems to be screaming, "Please don't eat our chickens." And so, foraging is no longer a matter of picking a few stray apples from an orchard. It has become an organized, aggressive, and necessary act of theft. Each day, as the main column trudges along the road, groups of men fan out into the countryside. You join one of these groups. The piety and comradeship of the first weeks has evaporated, replaced by a lean, predatory hunger. You are no longer looking for charity. You're looking for anything that isn't nailed down. You and a dozen other men. Your face is grim, your eyes constantly scanning. Move through the fields. You have developed a new skill, aggressive botany. You can now identify every possibly edible root and leaf within a 5-mile radius. Most taste like dirt and offer a little sustenance, but it's a flavor you're getting used to. You come upon a small farmstead. The farmer and his family stand outside their hut, armed with pitchforks and clubs. Their faces a mixture of terror and defiance. But they are 4, and you are 12. Your leader, a big, brutal man from Normandy, doesn't even try to parley. His men shove the family aside and ransack the cottage. They emerge with a squealing piglet and a sack of onions. This is a great victory, a feast, as you march back to the main camp. The piglet's cries are a song of salvation. That night, you eat roasted pork, the rich, fatty meat an explosion of flavor in your mouth. The first real meal you have had in weeks. But as you chew, you cannot shake the image of the farmer's face. The look of utter despair as you stole his family's future. This is not the holy war you imagined. This is just brutal, thuggish robbery, born of a desperation so profound it has extinguished your conscience. These acts of violence do not go unanswered. The local lords, responsible for protecting their own people, begin to react. Their knights and men-at-arms, far better equipped than your ragged band, start to shadow the column. They attack your foraging parties, and small, bloody skirmishes break out daily in the woods and fields. It is a strange, ugly side war fought not against the infidel, but against your fellow Christians. You are forced to fight for a stolen chicken with the same ferocity you were saving for the Saracens. Historians debate the level of violence and pillaging committed by these early crusaders. Some chroniclers of the time, especially the Byzantines who watched your host with horror, paint a picture of a relentless, destructive mob. Other accounts suggest that leaders like Peter the Hermit and Walter Saint-Sauveur tried their best to maintain discipline, but were powerless against the force of mass starvation. Was your host a rampaging army of thugs from the beginning, or a pious pilgrimage that degenerated into one under the extreme pressure of hunger? As you wipe blood from a cut on your cheek, a wound you received from a Hungarian peasant's scythe, the academic distinction feels meaningless. You are what you are, a hungry man, a long way from home. You finally leave the kingdom of Hungary and enter the territory of the Byzantine Empire. This is a new world. The language is utterly alien. The churches look different, topped with domes instead of spires. The people are subjects of an emperor in a city called Constantinople, and they view you and your chaotic host with profound suspicion. They are Christians. Yes, but they are Orthodox, not Catholic. To them, you are a barbarian, a Latin, a Frank, and your pilgrimage looks more like an invasion. The Byzantine Emperor, Alexios Komnenos, is a shrewd and cautious ruler. He had appealed to the West for trained, professional mercenaries to help him fight the Seljuk Turks, who had conquered most of his lands in Anatolia. He did not ask for, nor did he want, this shambling, undisciplined mob of peasants and petty knights. He sees your host for what it is, a dangerous and unpredictable problem that has washed up on his doorstep. His policy is one of damage control. He provides guides or guards. It's hard to tell the difference to escort you through his lands. Their job is to keep you on the main road and prevent you from pillaging the countryside. They try to set up organized markets at designated rest stops. Here, you are supposed to be able to buy food at a fair price. But the system is a failure from the start. The Byzantine logistical chain, designed for their own professional armies, cannot cope with the sudden appearance of 50,000 extra mouths to feed. The food they provide is never enough. The bread runs out in an hour. Fights and riots break out as men stampede to get to the front of the line. You're learning a lot about international finance. Specifically, that the silver coins from your village are now considered worthless novelty items. But a Byzantine merchant might reluctantly trade you a handful of olives for your only spare shirt. After what feels like an eternity of marching through these suspicious, hostile lands. You see it, Constantinople, the city. It is beyond anything you could have possibly imagined. Your village was a collection of a few dozen hovels. The largest city you had ever seen might have had a few thousand people. Constantinople has a population of hundreds of thousands. It is surrounded by massive, triple-layered walls that seem to touch the sky. Inside, you catch glimpses of magnificent palaces, of churches whose domes are covered in gold, of markets teeming with goods from all over the world. It is the richest, most magnificent, and most powerful city on earth, and you are not allowed inside. Emperor Alexios keeps your entire host camped outside the walls. You are camped in a field, looking at this city of unimaginable wealth. While you boil weeds for your supper, you can smell the scent of baking bread wafting over the walls. A form of exquisite torture. You feel a deep, burning resentment. You are here to fight for Christ. And these wealthy, effete Greeks in their silk robes treat you like a dangerous animal to be kept in a cage. The cultural gap between your rustic, feudal, Latin world and their ancient, sophisticated, Roman world is a chasm that cannot be bridged. The emperor's only desire is to get you out of his hair as quickly as possible. He sees the trouble you are causing, the strain you are putting on his resources, and the potential for you to turn on him. He makes a fateful decision. He offers you transport. His great fleet will ferry your entire host across the Strait of the Bosporus, from the shore of Europe to the shore of Asia Minor. He presents it as a great favor, a noble gesture to speed you on your way to Jerusalem. In reality, he is washing his hands of you, dumping you into hostile territory where you will become the Turks' problem, not his. The leaders of your crusade, men like Peter the Hermit, eagerly accept. They are impatient. They want to get to the Holy Land and begin the real fight. A great fleet of Byzantine ships arrives, and the process of embarkation begins. You are herded onto a large, wide-beamed ship called a droman. You have never been on a boat before. The feeling of the deck shifting under your feet is strange and unsettling. You are packed onto the open deck with hundreds of other men, so tightly you can barely move. As the ship pulls away from the shore, you look back at the magnificent skyline of Constantinople. You are leaving Europe, the continent of your birth. Behind, you are sailing towards Asia, towards the lands of the infidel. You look around at your comrades. Their faces are thin and gaunt from months of hunger. Their clothes are in tatters. Their initial, joyous piety has been replaced by a grim, hard-edged desperation. You place a hand on your stomach, which aches with a familiar, hollow pain. The journey through friendly Christian lands was a disaster that has stripped you of your supplies, your illusions, and half of your original numbers. Now, you are about to march into the heart of the enemy's territory, and you are hungrier than you have ever been in your life. That first taste of the sea, the short, stomach-churning ferry ride across the Bosporus, was merely an appetizer. It was a brief introduction to the unsettling motion of a ship, a fleeting glimpse of a new kind of misery. But for many who took the cross, especially in the later Crusades, the sea was not a narrow strait to be hopped over. It was a vast, blue, terrifying desert that had to be crossed. A journey that could take weeks, or even months. So imagine your path was different. Imagine that instead of joining the chaotic land march of the People's Crusade, you are part of a more organized, professional army. You have marched not east, but south, through Italy. You find yourself not in the fields outside Constantinople, but in one of the great, teeming port cities of the Italian coast. Venice, perhaps, or Genoa. The city is a marvel of stone and water, but it is also a scene of utter chaos. The narrow streets are choked with thousands of soldiers like yourself, all waiting for passage to the Holy Land. Knights in their mail, men-at-arms, archers, and a sea of common foot soldiers are all camped in and around the city. A restless, anxious army going nowhere. The leaders of your crusade, the great lords and barons, are locked in endless negotiations with the city's merchant princes. For here, in this hub of commerce, a holy war is also a business transaction. The ships, the crews, the supplies, they all have a price. The Fourth Crusade, famously, would be forever altered by such a deal. When the Crusaders, unable to pay the exorbitant fee demanded by the Venetians, were diverted to do the city's bidding, ultimately sacking the Christian city of Constantinople. This transactional nature of the crusade is a stark reality. Your holy pilgrimage is subject to contracts, interest rates, and the cold calculus of profit and loss. Finally, the deals are struck. The silver has been paid. The ships are ready. And you get your first proper look at your home for the next month or more. It is not a sleek, fast vessel. It is a medieval, round ship. A tubby, broad-beamed cargo vessel with a high, castle-like structure at the bow and stern. It looks less like a ship designed for speed and more like a wooden bucket. Designed to hold as much cargo, or human misery, as possible without immediately sinking. The process of boarding is a nightmare. A narrow gangplank is your bridge from the solid world to a new, unstable one. You are herded aboard with hundreds of other men. Space is the most precious commodity. The knights and their retinues take the cabins in the high stern castle. You, a common soldier, are directed below deck. You descend a steep ladder into a twilight world. The air is thick with the smell of tar, damp wood, stale beer, and the unmistakable stench of the bilge of fetid, stagnant pool of wastewater sloshing in the very bottom of the ship. The deck is crowded with barrels, chests, and coils of rope, and other men, hundreds of them, all trying to find a few feet of space to call their own. You find a spot, Squeeze between a wooden pillar and a large barrel of salted beef and claim it. This will be your world. Then the horses are brought aboard, and the misery intensifies. The animals are panicked, their eyes wide with terror as they are hoisted onto the ship in large slings. They are tethered in the hold, adding their own unique, powerful odor of sweat, fear, and manure to the already potent atmosphere. The ship finally casts off its lines and is pulled out of the harbor. As it clears the breakwater and meets the open sea, the true nature of your new existence reveals itself. The ship begins to roll. It is a gentle, rhythmic motion at first, but it is relentless. And with it, the seasickness begins. Your stomach, already unsettled by nerves and a poor diet, starts to churn. You are not alone. All around you, men are groaning, their faces turning a pale, sweaty green. A man near you retches violently, adding his breakfast to the general filth on the deck. Soon, the entire hold is a chorus of groans and a symphony of vomiting. You're sharing the authentic experience of the sea with your comrades. Specifically, you're all taking turns throwing up into the same dark, smelly corners of the hold. It's a great bonding activity. After a few days, your body may or may not adjust to the motion, but a new, more enduring torment takes center stage: the food. The rations on a medieval ship are not designed for nutrition or pleasure. They are designed for one thing only: preservation. Your diet for the foreseeable future will consist of three main ingredients. First, there is the ship's biscuit, also known as hardtack. It is the foundation of your diet. It is a simple, unleavened biscuit made of flour, water, and sometimes a little salt. Baked 2, 3, or even 4 times until it is utterly devoid of moisture. The result is a square or round cracker as hard as a piece of wood. To eat it, you must break it against something hard and then soak the pieces in water, wine, or soup until it softens enough that it won't break your teeth. But its most defining feature is the infestation. The barrels of biscuit are a perfect breeding ground for weevils and maggots. When you break open a piece of biscuit, it is often crawling with tiny black insects. The veterans give you practical advice. You can either eat them for the extra protein, or you can tap the biscuit firmly on the table and watch your dinner scamper away. Second, there is the salted meat. This is usually pork or beef, though sometimes goat, which has been heavily cured in barrels of brine. When a barrel is opened, the smell is overpowering, a salty, pickled stench. The meat itself is incredibly tough and stringy. With a texture like shoe leather, it is so saturated with salt that it makes you desperately thirsty. A dangerous condition when fresh water is the most rationed commodity on the ship. And third, there is the liquid. The water is stored in wooden casks. After a few days at sea, it begins to go foul, it becomes slimy, and a green scum of algae grows on the surface. It tastes of stale wood and rot. It is rationed out in small, carefully measured portions each day, and you drink it gratefully, trying not to think about what might be growing in it. Often, the weak, sour wine or beer is safer to drink. As the alcohol kills some of the bacteria, it's not pleasant, but it's less likely to give you the flux. The daily menu. Then is a choice between rock-hard bread with bonus insects and salt-cured leather that used to be a pig. It's a culinary adventure where the grand prize is probably scurvy. Cooking is a rare luxury, aboard a wooden ship filled with tarred rope and canvas sails. Fire is the greatest possible danger. Cooking is only permitted on a special hearth, a sand-filled box on the main deck, and only when the weather is perfectly calm. Most days, the sea is too rough, the wind too strong, so you eat your food cold. You gnaw on your salty meat and dunk your weevil-infested biscuit into your cup of sour wine. And you call it a meal. Life below deck is a special kind of hell. It is perpetually dark. The only light comes from a few swinging lanterns, which cast long, dancing shadows. and the thin shafts of daylight that pierce the gloom through the grated hatches. The air is hot, thick, and unmoving. With hundreds of men packed into a small space, the oxygen is quickly used up, replaced by the stench of unwashed bodies and sickness. The sound is a constant symphony of misery, the groaning of the ship's timbers, the sloshing of the bilge water below, the coughing and snoring of the men, and the nervous stamping of the horses when the weather turns. The misery intensifies. A storm at sea in a medieval ship is a terrifying experience. The ship, which felt so large and solid in port, now feels like a fragile toy tossed about by a malevolent giant. It climbs mountainous waves and then plunges into deep troughs, a motion that brings on a fresh wave of violent seasickness. The wind howls through the rigging, waves crash over the decks, sending torrents of cold seawater down the hatches, drenching you and your meager possessions. The timbers of the ship groan and creak as if they are about to splinter apart. You lie in the darkness, listening to this terrifying concert, and you pray. You pray to God, to the Virgin Mary, to any saint you can think of. You are utterly helpless, a tiny speck of life at the mercy of the vast, indifferent power of the sea. Boredom is a constant battle. When the weather is calm, there is nothing to do. You can't drill, you can't practice. You can only sit, or lie, and wait. The days stretch into an undifferentiated eternity of sea and sky. Men try to pass the time by gambling, playing dice or card games for stakes that become increasingly desperate. Others try to mend their worn-out gear or simply stare at the wooden ceiling of their floating prison. Slowly losing their minds, tensions inevitably run high. In such cramped and miserable conditions, small annoyances become major provocations. A dispute over a stolen biscuit or a mouthful of water can easily escalate into a vicious fight. The knights and their men, living in their relatively spacious cabins, are removed from the worst of the squalor, and a deep resentment simmers among the common soldiers who are packed like salted fish in the hold. Maritime historians and archaeologists still debate the true conditions on these Crusader transport ships. Some medieval chronicles claim certain ships carried over 1,000 men and their horses. But it's hard to imagine how such a number could be sustained on a voyage of several weeks. The logistics of providing even foul water and weevily biscuit for so many are staggering. It is likely that the mortality rate from disease, malnutrition, and simple despair on these voyages was appallingly high. A grim and accepted cost of transporting an army to the Holy Land. After weeks that have felt like years, a cry comes from the lookout high on the mast. Land ho! A ripple of excitement and relief passes through the ship. You scramble up the ladder and onto the crowded main deck, pushing your way to the rail, and you see it. It is a pale, hazy line on the horizon. Land, the Holy Land. You have made it. You have crossed the Great Sea. The ordeal is over, or so you think. As you draw closer, you see a coastline of parched brown hills and sandy shores under a blazing, unfamiliar sun. There are no green fields, no welcoming forests. It is an alien, intimidating landscape. You have traded your floating wooden prison for a much larger one of hot sand and hostile territory. You are weak from seasickness and a diet of salt and insects. Your pilgrimage is about to enter its next and most deadly phase. The ship grinds against the sandy bottom of the shore with a shudder that runs through the deck. The voyage is over, a chaotic energy, born of desperation and relief, animates the men around you. Ropes are thrown, makeshift gangplanks are lowered, and the process of disembarkation begins. You clamber down onto the beach of the Holy Land, your legs unsteady after weeks at sea. The sand is hot, the sun a physical blow. You have arrived. The first thing that strikes you is the heat. It is nothing like the gentle warmth of a French summer. This is a dry, relentless, baking heat that leaches the moisture from your body and makes the air shimmer. Your thick wool tunic, which provided comfort in the cool mornings of your homeland, is now a personal furnace. Sweat stings your eyes and trickles down your back, soaking the coarse fabric. The light is dazzling, a brilliant, white glare that reflects off the sand and the sea. Forcing you to squint, you were promised a land of milk and honey. What you got was a land of rocks and regret, with a complimentary all-day sauna session thrown in. Whether you want it or not, the second thing you notice is the landscape itself. You look past the beach, past the dunes, and you see not the lush green fields of your imagination, but a vista of parched brown hills, dotted with thorny shrubs and strange, twisted olive trees. The soil is rocky and pale. In the distance, you can see a small village, not of familiar wood and thatch, but of stark, mud brick cubes. This is not the verdant paradise described by the preachers. This is an alien world, harsh and unforgiving. The last of the ship's supplies are unloaded, a few remaining barrels of foul water, and a final distribution of stony. Weevil-eaten biscuit. And then, that's it. The ships that brought you here will soon sail away, back to their profitable trade routes, leaving you stranded on this hostile shore. The umbilical cord to Europe has been cut. You now have no food, no supplies, and no immediate prospect of getting any. The great logistical oversight of the entire crusading enterprise becomes brutally, immediately apparent. The leaders of your host, the great lords and knights, seem to have operated on a vague and fatally optimistic assumption that the Holy Land would simply provide for their needs upon arrival. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The land here is not empty, and its inhabitants are not waiting to welcome you with open arms. The local population, a complex mix of native Orthodox and Syriac Christians, Jews, and the ruling Muslims, are terrified of your large, armed, and clearly starving army. They have hidden their livestock in the hills. They have buried their stores of grain. The villages you approach are either deserted or defended by wary, hostile men. Your new supply strategy is called hoping a Genoese ship shows up before we have to eat the camp donkey. It's not a very good strategy. The Italian maritime states Venice, Genoa, Pisa are the key to your survival. They are the only ones with the ships and the naval power to control the sea lanes and bring supplies from Europe or from friendlier ports like Cyprus. But they are merchants, not charities. They will only bring food to a coastal city that is securely in Crusader hands. And they will sell that food at prices so exorbitant that only the wealthiest barons can afford it. If you are campaigning inland, a few dozen miles from the coast, you might as well be on the moon. The supply ships are a distant rumor, a tantalizing myth of salvation that has no bearing on your empty stomach. Water quickly becomes a more immediate and terrifying problem than food in the oppressive heat. Your body craves it constantly. Your water skin is empty within an hour of filling it. But where do you find more? The streams shown on your crude maps are often just dry, rocky beds. The wells in the villages are deep, and often you find them deliberately fouled by the retreating Saracen armies or the fearful locals. You might find a well filled with sand, or worse, with the carcass of a dead animal, its putrefying flesh turning the precious water into a deadly poison. You become a connoisseur of bad water. You learn to distinguish between water that is merely brackish and silty, and water that will give you the bloody flux. You learn to dig in dry riverbeds, hoping to find a seep of cleaner, sand-filtered water below the surface. Thirst becomes a tyrant. Your lips crack. Your tongue feels thick and swollen in your mouth. You think of the cool, clear streams of your homeland with an agonizing, painful longing. The army makes its first march inland, away from the relative safety of the coast. The objective is a fortified city, perhaps Antioch, or even the great prize itself, Jerusalem. The march is an ordeal that dwarfs your journey across Europe. The sun is a relentless enemy. You wear your conical steel helmet, and it becomes a small oven, baking your brain. You wear your coat of mail, a shirt of interlocking iron rings, and its weight is a crushing burden, its metal rings becoming too hot to touch. Men, unused to the savage heat and already weakened by the sea voyage, begin to collapse from heat stroke, their bodies shutting down under the strain. The landscape itself feels like an enemy. You march through narrow, rocky defiles where the heat is trapped, and where the threat of ambush from Saracen skirmishers is constant. You learn to fear the sound of a distant horn, the sight of a plume of dust on the horizon. The Turkish horse archers are masters of this terrain. They appear, fire a volley of arrows into your dense, slow-moving column, and then melt back into the hills before your heavy cavalry can even react. They are ghosts picking you off one by one, a constant draining and demoralizing threat. In this barren land, you begin to encounter new and strange forms of potential sustenance. You see trees bearing dark, leathery pods, a local Christian guide, if you can find one you trust, tells you they're called carob, or St. John's bread. You break one open. The pulp inside is dry and vaguely sweet. It is an obscure but vital famine food, something to chew on that quiets the ache in your stomach for a little while. You find date palms, and you gorge on the intensely sweet fruit, which gives you a burst of energy followed by a wave of stomach cramps. You are given a pomegranate. It looks like a polished red rock. Not knowing any better, you try to bite into it like an apple. A terrible mistake that fills your mouth with the bitter taste of the rind and leaves you spitting for an hour. The leaders of your army try to impose some order on the chaos of feeding the host. They send out armed foraging parties. But the land has already been stripped bare. The result is often a bloody clash with a Saracen patrol or a hostile village for the prize of a few scrawny goats. The army's failure to adapt its own agricultural knowledge to this new environment is total. Environmental historians debate whether this was due to simple ignorance of the local climate and crops, or a kind of cultural arrogance, a refusal to adopt the inferior farming methods of the locals, insisting instead on trying to find familiar wheat and barley where only hardy chickpeas and olives would grow. For you. The reason doesn't matter. The result is an empty pot and a hollow gut. One day, your foraging party comes across a small, abandoned olive grove. The trees are heavy with fruit. Olives, you have heard of them? They are a blessed fruit, mentioned in the Bible. You and your comrades fall upon them with joy, stuffing the bitter, raw fruit into your mouths. A few hours later, your entire squad is violently ill, writhing on the ground with stomach cramps and vomiting. You did not know that raw olives are inedible, that they must be cured in brine for weeks to be palatable. It is another hard lesson in a long and brutal education. This new land is full of tricks, full of foods that look like salvation but deliver only more misery. You lie on the ground, your stomach in knots, staring up at the impossibly blue, pitiless sky. You think of the preacher in your village square, the man who promised you a land of milk and honey. You look at the parched, rocky ground around you. You feel the relentless, baking sun on your skin. You feel the deep, agonizing ache of thirst and the familiar, gnawing pain of hunger. You have arrived in the Holy Land, and you are beginning to suspect that it is an unholy place that will devour you whole. Your army is stalled, deep in this hostile territory, and the real famine has not even begun. The initial, paralyzing shock of your arrival has worn off, replaced by the gnawing, motivating force of a truly empty stomach. The army cannot simply sit on the beach and starve. A new kind of order begins to emerge, born not of drill square discipline, but of practical, desperate necessity. The chaotic, individual foraging attempts that ended in sickness and failure are replaced by organized, military operations. Your new role in this holy war, you discover, is not to charge the walls of Jerusalem, but to serve as a member of an armed foraging party. Your official job title is now Aggressive Shopper, and your key performance indicators are measured in stolen goats and liberated sacks of barley. The call goes out one morning. A knight of lesser nobility. Sir Gerard, a stern-faced man with a rusty helmet and a tired-looking horse, is leading a party of 50 men, and you are one of them. The mission is to sweep through a sector of the nearby hills and valleys and acquire, by any means necessary, anything edible. You are no longer just a hungry pilgrim. You are part of a disciplined extraction team. The group is a cross-section of the army itself, a dozen archers with their longbows, 30-foot soldiers like yourself armed with spears and shields, and the knight and his squire, their presence lending an air of authority and providing the heavy muscle should you encounter serious resistance. You set out at dawn, marching away from the sprawling, filthy main camp. The mood is tense, but focused. This is not a battle against a Saracen army. It is a hunt. You move through the rocky landscape, your eyes scanning every fold in the ground, every cluster of mud brick houses. The sun climbs, and the heat becomes a physical presence, shimmering off the rocks. Your mail shirt feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds. Each ring a tiny point of fire against your tunic. After a few hours, your scouts signal they have found a small village, nestled in a valley, that does not appear to be deserted. Sir Gerard calls a halt, and you creep to the edge of a ridge to look down upon your objective. It is a pitiful-looking place. A handful of flat-roofed houses clustered around a well. A few goats are penned in a crude stone enclosure. You see figures moving women carrying water. Old men sitting in the shade. It seems undefended. The plan is simple. The archers will take positions on the high ground, their arrows a threat to discourage any organized resistance. The rest of you, the foot soldiers, will descend into the village with Sir Gerard at your head and take what you can find. There's no talk of piety, no prayer. This is a purely pragmatic operation. You move down the hillside. The sound of your hobnailed boots on the loose rock seeming impossibly loud in the quiet air. As you approach, a dog begins to bark frantically. The villagers emerge from their homes, their faces etched with terror. They are not warriors. They are simple farmers. Their skin is brown and creased as the land itself. An old man, clearly the village elder, steps forward, his hands held up in a gesture of supplication. He begins speaking in a rapid, guttural tongue you do not understand. Sir Gerard, from his horse, simply points his sword at the goat pen, then at a small, domed structure that looks like a grain silo. The message is clear, a universal language of armed robbery. The villagers begin to wail, a sound of profound despair. You and your comrades sweep through the village. It feels deeply, shamefully wrong. This is not what you left your home for. You came here to fight armored Saracen warriors, not to terrorize old men and steal their winter provisions. But the hunger in your belly is a powerful, moral force. It silences your conscience. You enter a small, dark hovel. The air inside is cool and smells of dust and spices you've never encountered before. You see a large clay jar in the corner. You tip it over. A cascade of pale, hard grains barley. You think spills onto the floor. It is a treasure, a sight more beautiful than any stained glass window. You shout to your comrades, and men appear with empty sacks, scooping up the precious grain. In another hut, men find a small flock of chickens hidden in a back room. They are quickly grabbed, their squawking protests silenced with a brutal efficiency. You are in the midst of this sanctioned looting when you notice a small cross, crudely carved, hanging over the doorway of one of the huts. A woman stands there, weeping silently, holding a similar cross to her chest, and a horrifying realization dawns on you. These are not Muslims. These are Christians. They are the native people of this land, who have kept their faith for 1,000 years under various rulers. They are the very people you were told you were coming to protect, and you are starving them. You look at Sir Gerard. The knight sees the crosses too. For a moment, a flicker of something doubt, perhaps, or shame crosses his face. Then his expression hardens. The army must eat. His duty is to his men, to the crusade. He gives a sharp nod, and the looting continues. You came here to fight the Saracen, but you're spending most of your time in a complex theological dispute with a local Christian farmer over who has the greater need for his last chicken. The farmer, predictably, is losing the argument, this was the tragic reality of the Crusades. The massive, hungry Western armies were often as devastating to the local Christian populations as they were to the Muslims. Your need for food trumped any sense of shared faith, creating a deep and lasting rift between the European newcomers and the people they were supposedly liberating. Just as your party is finishing its work, loading the squealing goats and heavy sacks of grain. Disaster strikes. A horn blast echoes from the hills above the village. The local men, who had seemingly been away or in hiding, have returned. And they are not alone. They are joined by a small, swift-moving patrol of Turkish horsemen, their curved bows held ready. They have been drawn by the commotion. Suddenly, your simple robbery has turned into a desperate fight. Sir Gerard bellows orders. Archers, cover the retreat spearmen, form a line, protect the supplies. The Turkish horsemen are a whirlwind of motion, galloping along the ridges, firing arrows with unnerving accuracy. An arrow thuds into the back of the man next to you, and he goes down with a choked cry. You form a small, bristling hedgehog of spears, a poor man's version of the battlefield square. The village men, emboldened by the arrival of the Turks, charge down the hill, screaming in fury, wielding axes and farming implements. The fight is a chaotic, desperate scramble. It is not the organized clash of armies, but a messy, close-quarters brawl. You jab with your spear at a charging farmer, your heart pounding with fear. This is not for God. This is not for the liberation of Jerusalem. This is a fight to keep your stolen lunch. After a few minutes that feel like an eternity, Sir Gerard, seeing that you are outnumbered and outmaneuvered, gives the order to pull back. You retreat, still in your defensive formation, carrying the grain but abandoning the goats. You leave a half-dozen of your own men dead or wounded on the ground. You have your food, but you have paid for it in blood. The march back to the main camp is a tense, nerve-wracking affair. Every shadow in the rocks could be an ambusher. Every plume of dust on the horizon could be more Turkish cavalry. You finally arrive back at camp after dark, exhausted, blood-spattered, but successful. You are greeted as heroes. The sacks of barley are presented to the army's quartermasters, who will distribute it. Your reward is a double portion of the thin, watery stew that night, now thickened with the precious grain you fought for. It is the most delicious thing you have ever tasted. You sit by the fire, devouring every drop, the warmth spreading through your empty stomach. For the first time in weeks, the gnawing ache is gone, replaced by a feeling of dull, heavy satisfaction. You have feasted, but as you sit there, the reality of your situation settles back in. The grain you captured will feed the army for a day, maybe two, then it will be gone, and the hunger will return. You look out at the thousands of campfires, a city of starving men in a barren, hostile land. You know that tomorrow, or the day after, you or men just like you will be sent out again, to hunt, to steal, and to fight. You are not a pilgrim on a holy quest anymore. You are a predator, and this is your new daily routine, a desperate cycle of foraging, feasting, and fighting, with no end in sight. The feasting is a brief, fleeting moment of relief. The hunger is eternal. The feasting is over. The brief, glorious memory of roasted goat and savory stew fades like a pleasant dream, leaving behind the stark, waking reality of your situation. The army marches on, a great hungry beast consuming everything in its path, until it arrives before the walls of a great city. It might be the formidable fortress of Antioch, nestled in its valley, or another of the legendary walled cities of the Levant. The specific name doesn't matter. What matters are the walls. They are immense, a towering statement of power and defiance, stretching for miles, studded with square towers and bristling with enemy banners that snap in the hot wind. You stare up at them from the dusty plain, feeling like an insect. The preachers and the priests give stirring sermons. The great lords make bold proclamations. They declare that you have cornered your foe. You will lay siege to this city, cut it off from all aid, and starve them into submission. There is a wave of optimism through the army. The final chapter, it seems, is about to be written. What you don't realize, as you help dig the first trench for your camp's defensive perimeter, is that you are not the one laying the siege. The siege is being laid upon you. You have voluntarily walked into a trap, imprisoning yourself in a barren landscape with a well-stocked pantry at its center that you are forbidden from entering. In the first weeks, the routine you established on the march continues. Large, armed foraging parties are sent out to scour the countryside. But the area for 10, then 20, then 30 miles around the city is quickly picked clean. The foraging parties return with less and less, until finally they return with nothing at all. The last of the local villages has been plundered. The last hidden grain store has been found. The last scrawny goat has been eaten. The landscape is a barren, silent vacuum. And now, with no more food coming in from the surrounding land, the slow starvation begins. The army leadership, faced with a dwindling supply and a growing number of mouths, is forced to act. The rations are officially cut. Your daily portion of bread, already small, is halved. The stew becomes a thin, watery broth with perhaps a single, lonely piece of bean floating in it. Hunger, which was once a frequent visitor, now becomes a permanent resident. A hollow, aching presence that lives in the pit of your stomach. The first to be sacrificed are the beasts of burden. The slow, plodding oxen that pulled the supply wagons are slaughtered. They're tough. Stringy meat is a welcome addition to the pot, but they are too few. Then the pack mules and donkeys are sacrificed. Finally, the ultimate sign of desperation, the knights begin to kill their horses. Not the common nags, but their prized war horses, their destriers, symbols of their status and their primary weapons of war. The meat is lean and tough, with a strange Swedish taste, but it is a meat. You eat your portion greedily, trying not to think about what it means when an army starts to eat its own cavalry, when the last horse is gone. You enter a new and terrifying phase of culinary exploration. The entire camp becomes a vast, desperate hunt for anything that might contain a sliver of nourishment. You have become an involuntary, extreme vegan. Your diet now consists of grass, which you boil into a bitter, unappetizing mush. You chew on tree bark and leaves. You dig for roots with your knife, eating them raw, dirt and all. Sometimes you get lucky and find something vaguely nutritious. More often, you find a root that is poisonous, and you spend the night writhing with stomach cramps, vomiting up what little you had in your belly. You become a hunter of vermin. The camp, with its filth and waste, is teeming with rats, and they are now a prime source of protein. You set crude snares, you corner them in your tent. A large rat, roasted over a fire, becomes a feast for you and your closest comrades. You fight over it, tearing the small, greasy creature apart with your bare hands. The camp's internal economy shifts. The currency is no longer silver, but food. A man might trade his woolen blanket for a piece of bread. A sword might be bartered for a dead rat. You're pretty sure you could trade your helmet for a handful of acorns right now, and it would feel like a good deal. As the weeks drag on, the physical transformation of the army is horrifying. You and everyone around you become walking skeletons. Your skin, tanned by the sun, is stretched tight over your cheekbones. Your eyes are sunken and hollow. Your belly, paradoxically, might be swollen and distended from malnutrition. You move slowly, listlessly, conserving every drop of energy. A profound apathy settles over the camp. Men no longer have the strength to mend their gear, to tell stories, to sing. The only sounds are the whistling of the wind through the tattered tents and the low. Constant moaning of the sick and the dying. Your world shrinks to the size of your own aching body and the few feet of dusty ground around your crude shelter. You think of food constantly. It is an obsession, a madness. You lie on the ground and fantasize about the food of your old life. You conjure up the image of a loaf of your mother's dark bread, fresh from the oven, its crust thick and chewy. You can almost smell it, taste it. You remember the feasts at Christmas, the roasted pork, the rich gravy. The memories are a form of self-torture, but you cannot stop them. This prolonged agony was the defining feature of the Great Siege of Antioch during the First Crusade. For 8 months, the Crusader army lay outside the city walls, slowly wasting away. They were simultaneously the besiegers and the besieged, trapped between an impregnable fortress and a barren wasteland. Their great army dying a slow death from starvation. The psychological warfare from the city's defenders is relentless and brutally effective. You are lying in your shelter, your stomach cramping with hunger, and you can smell it the faint. Tantalizing scent of baking bread wafting over the walls on the breeze. The defenders know you are starving, and they take every opportunity to torment you. You see them on the battlements, holding up whole roasted chickens, pretending to feast. They dangle large fish over the side of the wall, then pull them back up, laughing. Their taunts are more effective than any arrow or stone from a catapult. They are attacking your spirit, reminding you that just a few hundred yards away lies a world of plenty, a world you cannot reach. Your faith, once the bedrock of your entire journey, begins to crack. You pray. Of course, so you go to the masses held by the priests, their own faces as gaunt and hollow as yours. They tell you this is a test from God, a trial to purify your souls before the final victory. They tell you to have faith. But faith is a difficult thing to maintain on a diet of boiled grass and ditch water. You look at the high, unbreachable walls of the city, and you look at the skeletal figures of your comrades dying all around you, and for the first time, you feel the cold, terrifying touch of utter hopelessness. God, it seems, has abandoned you here in this dusty hell. The social fabric of the army disintegrates. Men who were once your comrades, who shared their last piece of bread with you, now look at you with suspicion. Every man is for himself. A hidden stash of a few dried beans is a treasure to be guarded with your life. A man who shows weakness, who is too sick to defend himself, might wake to find his last meager possessions stolen. The laws of God and man have been suspended, replaced by the single, overriding law of the empty stomach. Military historians debate the strategic wisdom of these prolonged sieges. Were they a necessary evil? The only way to capture the vital? Fortified cities that controlled the routes to Jerusalem? Or were they a catastrophic blunder? A trap that the Crusaders repeatedly walked into, allowing their magnificent armies to be destroyed not by the sword, but by famine and disease. Some argue that a more mobile strategy, bypassing the great cities, might have worked better. Others contend that leaving a strong enemy garrison in your rear was a strategic impossibility. As you lie on the ground, too weak to even brush the flies from your face, the debate is academic. You are living the consequence of the decision. You are a skeleton in a dying army, camped outside a city of plenty, and you have started to look at the scrawny, leather-like skin on your own arm and wonder, with a distant, clinical horror, what it might taste like. The slow starvation has brought you to the edge of the abyss. You are lying on the dusty ground, and the world has shrunk to the frantic, panicked beating of your own heart. The slow starvation of the past few months has burned away everything that was not essential. It has consumed your fat, your muscle, your strength, your hope, and now it has consumed your morality. The thought that entered your mind at the end of the last chapter, The Cold. Clinical. Horrifying assessment of the emaciated flesh on your own arm was the final surrender. You have been brought to the edge of the abyss. And now, the army is about to take a collective leap into it. The camp is no longer a camp. It is a sprawling, open-air morgue. The daily collection of the dead has long since ceased. The living no longer have the strength to bury the dead. The bodies of your comrades lie where they fell, in their crude shelters, by the dead embers of their last fires. They are a constant, silent reproach. At first, you averted your eyes. To look upon their skeletal, wasted forms was to see a mirror of your own fate. But now, as the absolute final stage of starvation takes hold, you and the other survivors begin to look at them differently. Your mind, warped by a hunger so profound it has become a form of madness, begins to perform a terrible, logical calculus. It begins not as a decision, but as a whisper. A rumor that passes through the dying camp like a foul miasma. You see a small group of men, wild-eyed and gaunt, huddled around a fire they have somehow managed to build. The smell that comes from their cooking pot is not that of boiled grass or leather. It is something else. Something disturbingly familiar. They are the Tafurs, a near-mythical band of the poorest and most savage pilgrims, who have always lived on the fringes of the army. And who have now, it seems, abandoned the last vestiges of civilization. You watch them, and a part of you is horrified, disgusted. But another part, the larger part, the part that is just a screaming, empty stomach, is curious. You crawl back to your own shelter, where the last of your squad mates, a man from Flanders named Lambert, lies shivering with fever and weakness. Did you see them? You whisper, your voice a dry rasp. He nods, his eyes wide in his skeletal face. God forgive us. He breathes, but God feels very far away. He is not here in the dust and the stench of death. He is not here in the relentless, mocking sun. Here, there is only the hunger, and the hunger is a God that demands sacrifice. That night, the thought, the terrible calculus, will not leave you alone. You lie there, your stomach convulsing with painful cramps, and your mind rationalizes. It is a desperate, insane logic, but it feels undeniable. They are already dead. Their suffering is over. Their souls are with God. What remains is just meat. Like the horse, like the ox, it is flesh. God would not want his entire army, his warriors, to perish from weakness when the means to survive is right there. It is a test, a terrible test, to save our own lives, to complete our holy vow. We must. You cannot finish the thought, but it hangs there. In the darkness, it is Lambert who breaks. In the dead of night, he shakes you awake. His eyes are gleaming with a terrifying, feverish light. I cannot die like this, he whispers. There is a man, from the Norman contingent. He died this afternoon. No one has taken him yet. You follow him. You don't want to. But your body moves of its own accord, dragged by the gravitational pull of your all-consuming need. You crawl through the silent, corpse-strewn camp. It is a landscape from hell. You reach the spot. The body is there. A young man, his face peaceful in the moonlight. Looking like a statue of a saint carved from ivory, what happens next is a blur of shame and horror. A memory that will be seared into your soul forever. A brand that will never fade. It is not a violent act. It is a stealthy, furtive, ghoulish one. You and Lambert work in silence. Your movements clumsy, your hands trembling. You do what you have to do. You take a small portion. You wrap it in a piece of dirty cloth and crawl back to your shelter like thieves. Your heart's pounding with guilt and a strange, sick excitement. You cannot cook it over an open fire. That would announce your sin to the entire camp. You chew on a piece. Raw. The texture is stringy. The taste metallic and foul. It is nothing like any meat you have ever eaten. It is the taste of profound transgression. It is the taste of your own damnation. It does not fill you. It sits in your stomach like a stone. A cold, heavy lump of guilt. You have eaten. You have committed the ultimate taboo to gain a few more hours of wretched life. And in doing so, you have lost what was left of your humanity. This monstrous choice was the reality for the Crusaders during the great sieges of the First Crusade, at Meera, after its capture, and during the long siege of Antioch. The starving Christian army resorted to cannibalism. The contemporary chronicles, both Christian and Muslim, are clear on this point. Our men, wrote one Crusader chronicler, Fulcher of Chartres, boiled the pagan adults in cooking pots. They impaled children on spits and devoured them grilled. The Muslim chroniclers wrote with horror of these Frankish ghouls who feasted on the bodies of the slain. The crusade has taken an unexpected culinary turn. Your quest for the Holy Land has devolved into a desperate search for the unholiest of meals. The practice spreads. What was once done in secret, in the dead of night, becomes a grim, unspoken fact of camp life. You see other men you knew and respected, with the same haunted, guilty look in their eyes. You do not speak of it. It is a shared secret, a collective sin that binds you all together in a new, terrible fraternity. You have become a pack of wolves, and the line between the living and the dead has become terrifyingly thin. The leaders of the crusade, the great princes like Bohemond and Raymond, are aware of what is happening. Their reaction is a complex mixture of public horror and private. Pragmatic acceptance. They need the army to survive. A dead army cannot take a city, and so they turn a blind eye. A priest, his own face gaunt with hunger, gives a sermon about the terrible trials God has sent you, his voice cracking with an emotion you can no longer identify. Is it piety or is it despair? The academic debate continues to this day. Was the cannibalism at Antioch and Meera a widespread practice? A total breakdown of civilization in the face of famine? Or was it limited to a few fringe elements? The stories then exaggerated by all sides for their own purposes, by the crusade leaders to emphasize the depth of their suffering and the scale of their eventual triumph, and by their Muslim enemies to paint them as inhuman monsters. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. But for you, it is not an academic question. It is the cold, indigestible lump of meat in your belly. The final taboo is crossed when you begin to look not at your own dead, but at the enemy. After a small skirmish outside the walls, a sally by the city's defenders that you manage to repulse, the calculus changes. In the past, you would have looted the enemy dead for their swords, their mail, their helmets. Now, you look at them and see something else. You see a source of fresh meat. The act of stripping a dead Saracen now has a dual purpose. And this is what transforms you from a desperate survivor into a true monster in the eyes of your foe. They look down from the walls and see you carrying the bodies of their fallen comrades back to your camp. And they know what you intend to do. They now fight with a new ferocity, a new terror, because they know that death is not the worst thing that can happen to them. A new, unholy fear has been added added to the arsenal of war. You have survived. You have eaten. But the food has given you no strength. It has only deepened the hollow in your soul. You are now defined by your monstrous act. It is who you are. A man who has eaten another man to live. And then, when all hope seems lost, when the army is just days away from complete annihilation, the city falls. Perhaps a traitor inside opens a gate. Perhaps a desperate. Final assault finds a weak spot in the wall. The details are lost in a blur of renewed. Feverish strength. You find yourself stumbling through the gates of the city you have stared at for so many months. You are surrounded by food. The city's granaries are not empty. You see sacks of flour, jars of olives and oil, pens of live animals. The smell of baking bread from a still warm oven makes you weep. You and the other skeletal survivors fall upon this bounty like a pack of starved animals. Stuffing your mouths with anything you can find, you gorge yourself, your shrunken stomach rebelling in painful cramps. You are saved. But as you sit in the street of the conquered city, surrounded by unimaginable plenty, chewing on a piece of fresh, warm bread, the taste is bland. It has no flavor. All you can taste is the memory of the cold. Foul meat you ate in the darkness outside the walls. You have been rescued from the abyss. But the abyss is now inside you. You are a survivor. But you look at your own hands. The hands that committed the unthinkable act. And you are no longer sure if you are even human. You are in the city. You have won. The desperate. Months-long siege is over. The gates are open. The enemy is defeated. And you are surrounded by the spoils of victory. For a man who, just days ago, was contemplating the nutritional value of tree bark. The scene inside the conquered city is a vision of paradise. There are storehouses filled with grain. There are pens with live animals. There are markets with jars of olives and honey, and sacks of strange, fragrant spices, the smell of baking bread. Once a form of exquisite torture, is now a song of salvation. You and the other skeletal survivors of the siege fall upon this bounty not like soldiers, but like a pack of starving wolves. You tear into loaves of bread with your bare hands, stuffing your mouth until you can barely chew. You find a cask of wine and drink until your head spins. You see a comrade roast a chicken over a fire and you watch, mesmerized, as the fat drips and sizzles. This is the moment you have dreamed of, the feast at the end of the famine, and then your own body betrays you. Your stomach, having shrunk over months of starvation and adapted to a meager diet of grass and leather, violently rebels against this sudden, rich onslaught, a wave of nausea, followed by painful cramps, doubles you over. The glorious feast you have just consumed makes a swift and ignominious exit. All around you, other men are similarly afflicted, their celebration cut short by a new kind of internal misery. It is a grim and ironic welcome to the promised land you have survived starvation, only to be felled by the very food you craved. As your body slowly recovers from the shock of plenty, a new and far more insidious enemy begins to make its presence felt. It is an enemy you cannot fight with a sword, an enemy that seeps into your camp and into your body without a sound. It is the tyranny of thirst and disease. Having a city does not mean you have clean water. The city's wells, which seemed like a divine gift, soon proved to be a curse. Perhaps the retreating Saracens poisoned a few of them before they fled. More likely, the cisterns that hold the rainwater have been stagnant for months, a breeding ground for invisible malevolences. The sheer number of your army, now crowded within the city walls, puts an impossible strain on these limited sources. The areas around the wells become muddy pits, contaminated with animal and human waste. The water you draw is cloudy, and it has a faint, foul taste. But the sun is relentless, the heat is oppressive, and you are constantly, agonizingly thirsty. So you drink it. You have two choices for drinking water, probably poisoned and definitely poisoned. It adds a fun element of chance to the simple act of staying hydrated. And so the sickness begins. It starts with a few men, then dozens, then hundreds. The first and most common affliction is the flux, dysentery. It begins with a familiar, unwelcome cramping in your gut. Then comes the urgent, repeated need to find a latrine trench. Soon, you're spending half your day in the stinking, fly-blown pits that pass for the Army's sanitation system. A fever begins to burn behind your eyes. You become weak, your body losing precious fluids faster than you can take them in. It is a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. The dysentery dehydrates you. The dehydration makes you desperately thirsty. And the only water available to quench that thirst is the very same water that is poisoning you. You see strong knights, men who survive the bloodiest battles. Reduced to weak, groaning shells, unable to even wear their heavy mail. They die not from a glorious saber cut, but from a humiliating, wasting disease of the bowels. Dying in their own filth? The camp becomes a vast sick ward, and the air grows thick with the stench of sickness and death. Then another fever appears. A different beast. Typhoid. It is slower, more cunning. It starts with a headache and a general feeling of fatigue. Then the fever climbs, higher and higher, until you're lost in a bewildering delirium. You lie on your pallet of straw, your mind adrift in a sea of disjointed memories and terrifying hallucinations. You see a characteristic rash of rose-colored spots appear on your chest. You are burning from the inside out. Your fate is now in the hands of God and the strength of your own constitution. The medical response, if you can call it that, is often more dangerous than the disease itself. The Army's physicians and surgeons are men of theory, not science. Their understanding of the human body is based on the ancient Greek idea of the four humors blood: phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They believe that all sickness is caused by an imbalance of these humors. The doctor, a man whose hands are no cleaner than a butcher's, examines you. He sees your fever, your flushed face, and he diagnoses you with an excess of blood. His prescription is as predictable as it is lethal bloodletting. He produces a small, sharp knife called a lancet, and, without so much as wiping it clean from the previous patient, makes an incision in a vein on your inner arm. A small cup is placed over the cut to collect the blood. Or, even more commonly, he produces a jar of leeches, dark, slimy creatures, and places them on your skin. You watch, horrified, as they attach themselves and begin to feed, their bodies swelling with your own life force. The doctor's goal is to remove the bad blood that is causing the fever. What he is actually doing is further weakening and dehydrating your already struggling body, making you more vulnerable to the disease. The doctor has diagnosed you with an imbalance of the humors. His prescription is to drain most of your blood. It's a bold medical strategy that seems to have a 100% failure rate, but he's sticking with it. Medical historians today debate whether the Crusaders' own medical practices were more deadly than the diseases they were meant to treat. Was the dogmatic adherence to bloodletting a greater killer than the typhoid itself? Looking at the growing number of fresh graves outside the city walls, it seems likely your best chance of survival is often to avoid the attentions of the physician entirely. There are other options. Whispers in the camp of folk remedies and herbal cures. Some of the women who follow the army, the laundresses and camp followers, have their own stores of knowledge. They might offer you a bitter tea made from willow bark to help with your fever, or a thick, binding gruel made from carob pods to soothe your insides. These simple, traditional remedies are often far more effective than the learned ignorance of the physicians. An obscure detail of camp life is this quiet, unacknowledged medical system, running in parallel to the official one. A last resort for the desperate, the ever-present swarms of flies are your tiny, winged tormentors. They are born in the filth of the latrines and the unburied bodies. and they travel, their legs sticky with pestilence, to your food, your water, your face. They are the true cavalry of the enemy, an unstoppable army of infection, spreading misery with every landing. You wave them away, but they are relentless, a constant, buzzing reminder of the uncleanliness of your world. The psychological toll of the constant sickness is immense. It is one thing to face death in the heat of battle, an honorable, if terrifying, end. It is another thing entirely to waste away slowly, ignobly, defeated by an invisible enemy in your own guts. Morale, which had soared after the capture of the city, plummets. The army is a ghost of its former self, a hollowed-out force of invalids. Men who were once proud warriors are now just sick, frightened patients, waiting to see if they will live or die. You lie in your filthy corner of a commandeered building, the delirium of the fever taking hold, the line between waking and dreaming blurs. You are back on the march, your throat parched. You are on the ship, the deck heaving beneath you. You are outside the walls, the smell of roasting meat from the city driving you mad. But always. The dream ends with a burning thirst and a knot of pain in your belly. You have survived the sword. You have survived starvation. Now you are locked in a silent, internal battle with the most prolific killer on any pre-modern battlefield. Your fate no longer depends on your courage or your strength, but on the caprice of a fever, the quality of your last drink of water, and the simple, dumb luck of the draw. By some trick of fate, your fever breaks. You do not die in a delirious haze in a filthy corner of the conquered city. You survive, emerging from the sickness a weaker, thinner, more spectral version of yourself. You are a ghost, haunted by the memory of battle, of famine, of cannibalism, and now of disease. You have endured all the great trials the Crusade has thrown at you. Now you must face its most mundane, most persistent, and perhaps most infuriating trial, the tyranny of class. The initial, chaotic feasting that followed the city's capture is over. The storehouses that seemed impossibly full are now depleted, their contents having been distributed according to the unwritten but unbreakable laws of feudal hierarchy. The great lords and knights have claimed the lion's share, stocking their private larders. The army is now facing a new kind of famine. It is not an absolute famine of scarcity. Food now exists. The port you have captured is a lifeline. Ships from Genoa and Pisa arrive weekly, their holds filled with the necessities of life. Food is available. It is simply not available to you. You begin to understand that you are not in one army, but two, sharing the same space. First, there is the army of the wealthy, the dukes, counts, barons, and landed knights. They live in large, comfortable pavilions set up in the city squares. They have their squires, their servants, their men-at-arms. Their logistical chain is a private one. They have the silver to buy the flour, wine, and cheese brought by the Italian merchants. They feast while you watch. Then there is the second army, your army, the army of the poor, the thousands of common foot soldiers, archers, and landless pilgrims who sold everything they owned for a promise of salvation. Your purse is empty. Your worldly possessions consist of the ragged clothes on your back, your weapons, and a cracked wooden bowl. You are utterly dependent on the largesse of your leaders. And that largesse is thin. The new enemy is not a Saracen emir or a Turkish archer. It is the simple, brutal fact of your own poverty. The daily contrast is a form of exquisite torture that grinds away at your soul more effectively than any siege. Your day is structured around the distribution of rations. You line up with hundreds of other gaunt, hopeful men. A surly quartermaster, often a knight's man-at-arms who eats better than you do, doles out your portion for the day. It is a handful of barley or millet, grains you once would have considered fit only for animals. If you are lucky, you might receive a small piece of hard, salty cheese or a few withered olives. This is your fuel. On this, you are expected to maintain your strength, to stand guard on the walls, and to be ready to march and fight at a moment's notice. You take your meager portion back to your small group of survivors. You cook it in a communal pot over a smoky fire of scavenged wood, creating a thin, watery gruel that does little more than quiet the painful cramps in your stomach. It is a meal devoid of joy, a simple, functional act of staving off death for one more day. And as you eat your bland, gritty soup, the smells from the other army, the army of the rich, drift over to your section of the camp. It is the scent of roasting meat. The lords are dining. You are on guard duty one evening, standing outside the large, opulent tent of a French duke. You are a silent, invisible sentinel, and you are granted a glimpse into another world through the open flap of the tent. You see a long table covered in a surprisingly clean linen cloth. The duke and his favored knights are seated on proper chairs. Not on the dusty ground, they drink from gleaming silver cups. Not cracked wooden bowls. Servants move back and forth, bearing platters of food that make your mind reel. You see a whole roasted pig, its skin glistening and crisp. You see plates of delicate white bread. Not the coarse, dark stuff of your own village. There are bowls of strange, colorful fruits brought by the merchants. The air is thick with the scent of spices, cinnamon, cloves, pepper aromas so rich and exotic they seem to belong to another reality. You hear the sound of their laughter, the sound of a minstrel softly playing a lute in the corner. You watch as a knight finishes gnawing on a leg of pork and casually tosses the bone to a waiting dog. A sleek, well-fed hound that eats better than you do. You witness an obscure but telling detail of their feast. They use thick slices of day-old bread, called trenchers, as plates. They pile the meat and sauces onto these edible plates at the end of the meal. These gravy-soaked, flavor-rich pieces of bread, a meal in itself for you, are collected and thrown into a bucket, destined to be given as charity to a select few favored beggars, or, more likely, fed to the dogs. You watch this, and a cold, hard knot of pure, undiluted hatred forms in your gut. It is a hatred more profound than any you have ever felt for the Saracen. You are all, supposedly, soldiers of the cross. You have all taken the same vow. You stood in the same battle line, faced the same arrows, endured the same sun. How, then, can this be? How can one servant of God feast while another starves? The feudal logic, of course, is simple and has been ingrained in you since birth. The knight is a specialist in warfare. He must be kept strong and healthy to fight effectively. He is a valuable, expensive weapon. You, the common foot soldier, are numerous and expendable. Your role is to support him, to absorb the enemy's arrows, to die in the ditches below the walls he storms. It is the natural order of the world. But here, thousands of miles from the familiar fields of home, in the crucible of this holy war, the natural order has begun to feel like a profound, blasphemous injustice. The preacher's sermons about a united army of Christ, where all men are brothers in the service of God, now seem like a bitter, cynical joke. There are no brothers here. There is only the timeless hierarchy of the rich and the poor, the powerful and the weak. You are not in business class or economy. You are the cargo. You are the fuel being shoveled into the engine of the crusade to keep it moving. And you are burning out. This simmering resentment occasionally boils over. You hear of a group of starving soldiers from a Provençal contingent who gathered outside their lord's tent. Not in violent mutiny, but simply to beg for bread. They were dispersed by the lord's well-fed men-at-arms, beaten with the flat of their swords for their impertinence. The message is clear: you will accept your station, you will eat what you are given, And you will be grateful for it? Historians debate how this constant, grinding class-based hunger affected the cohesion of the crusading armies. Did the deep resentment lead to frequent, small-scale mutinies and a general breakdown of discipline, or was the feudal mindset so powerful, so deeply ingrained, that most common soldiers simply accepted this disparity as their divine lot, grumbling quietly but ultimately remaining obedient to their social superiors? The truth is likely that your own reaction is the most common one, a slow-burning, powerless rage that eats away at your morale but does not, cannot, erupt into open rebellion. To rebel is to be executed, and even a life of eating boiled weeds is, for now, preferable to no life at all. You finish your shift on guard duty and retreat back to the squalor of your own part of the camp. The enticing smells of the Lord's feast are replaced by the familiar stench of filth and sickness. You lie down on your thin straw pallet, the gnawing hunger in your stomach a familiar, unwelcome friend. You close your eyes, but you cannot sleep. You can only see the image of the roasted pig, the white bread, the discarded, gravy-soaked trenchers. The preachers told you that suffering on this earth purifies the soul and guarantees your reward in the next life. You must have the purest soul in all of Christendom by now. You know, with a certainty that chills you to the bone, that you would trade all of your heavenly reward for a single, stolen trencher from the Duke's table. The next morning, the bugles sound. An order has come down from the Council of Princes. The army is to prepare to march. A new objective has been chosen. A new city to be besieged. The lords and knights, rested and strong from their diet of fresh meat and good bread, are ready. Their squires polish their armor and saddle their strong, well-fed horses, and you, and the thousands of others like you, are expected to rise from your bed of straw, to find the strength in your malnourished, fever-racked bodies to lift your spear, to shoulder your shield, and to march another 100 miles under the merciless sun. Their strength is built upon your weakness. Their feast is predicated upon your famine. This is the unshakable, unholy truth of the crusade. Truth. The orders come down from the Council of Princes. And a new energy. The last flickering embers of the Crusade's original fire moves through the camp. You are marching on Jerusalem, the holy city. The name itself is a prayer, a magical incantation that has sustained you across thousands of miles of suffering. This is the ultimate goal, the reason you sold your home, the reason you have endured hunger, sickness, and the sight of horrors no man should see. The army is a fraction of its former self, a walking parade of ghosts and skeletons. But as you catch your first glimpse of the city's golden dome reflecting the sun on the horizon, a surge of profound, holy purpose electrifies the ranks. The siege of Jerusalem is, in many ways, a repeat of the horrors you have already endured. You are once again camped in a dry, unforgiving landscape. The summer sun is a merciless hammer. The thirst is a constant agony, as the city's defenders have poisoned or blocked most of the wells in the surrounding area. The starvation begins almost immediately, as the land around the city has long been stripped bare. You are back to chewing on leather and boiling weeds. But this time, it is different. There is a frantic, desperate energy. This is the final act. There will be no retreat, no relief. You will take this city, or you will die in the dust beneath its walls, after weeks of this final, agonizing starvation. The assault begins. Great wooden siege towers, built with timber laboriously dragged from miles away, are rolled towards the walls. You are part of the mass of infantry, your job being to provide covering fire with your bow, or to be the first one up the scaling ladders. The air is thick with arrows and the smoke from burning pitch. The noise is a deafening roar of war cries, of splintering wood, of men screaming in triumph and in pain. And then, a breach. The wall is taken. The gates are thrown open. The army pours into the holy city. What follows is not a moment of pious reverence, but an explosion of pent-up rage, hunger, and bloodlust. The city is subjected to a horrific, indiscriminate sack. You and the men around you, brutalized by years of hardship, are transformed into a wave of pure destruction. But your first instinct is not for gold or for vengeance. It is for food. You storm into a house, your sword ready, but you are not looking for inhabitants to kill. You are looking for the kitchen. You find a loaf of bread on a table and you fall upon it, tearing it apart with your bare hands, stuffing it into your mouth with tears of joy streaming down your face. You find a wine cellar and drink from the cask itself, the cool liquid a balm to your parched soul. You and your comrades become a ravening mob of pure appetite, breaking into bakeries, into storehouses, into private homes, consuming everything you can find in a frantic, desperate orgy of feasting. For one glorious, chaotic day, you are not hungry. You have captured the pantry. You have won. You sleep that night on the floor of a stranger's house, your belly full for the first time in memory. A deep, satisfied sleep of a man who has finally vanquished his greatest enemy. You awaken the next morning to a new reality. The silence in the city is eerie. The adrenaline is gone. The frenzy of the sack has passed, and as the sun rises on your victory, you begin to see the terrible irony of what you have done. You look out from a terrace onto the city you have just conquered. Before, it was a living place. Now, you have turned it into a graveyard. The bakers who made the bread you devoured, the merchants who stocked the larders you looted, the farmers who tended the gardens within the walls, most are dead, killed in the sack. The intricate social and economic web that allowed this city to feed itself has been utterly destroyed, and you realize your fundamental problem has not been solved. It has just grown larger. Before, you had to feed an army. Now, you have to feed an army and a conquered city. You have to establish a permanent garrison, a new government. But you have conquered a pantry while simultaneously killing the cooks and burning down the farm that supplied it. The land for miles around, which should be providing the city with its daily food, has been systematically devastated by your own army during the long months of campaign and siege. The spoils of your victory are finite. The grain you captured will last for a few weeks, a month perhaps, and then what? This is the great, obscure reality of the Crusader states that were founded after the First Crusade. The new Frankish kings, princes, and barons of Jerusalem, Antioch, and Edessa were not just conquerors, they had to become administrators. And their single greatest challenge was agriculture. They were a tiny ruling class of European knights trying to govern a large and hostile local population in a climate they did not understand. They had to learn, through brutal trial and error, how to cultivate olives instead of butter-producing cattle, how to manage water in a dry land, and how to protect their fragile supply lines from a constantly probing enemy. Historians debate the long-term viability of these states. Were they doomed from the start by these immense logistical and demographic problems? Or did they fail due to political infighting and a failure to adapt to the local culture? The academic debate rages on, but for you, the reality is much simpler. Your life as a crusader, a holy pilgrim on a quest, is over. Your new life as a garrison soldier, an occupying force in a hostile land, has begun. Your diet becomes a permanent reflection of your precarious situation. You are no longer starving, not most of the time, but your food supply is entirely dependent on the Italian ships that now control the port at Jaffa. When the seas are calm and the trade routes are safe, you eat reasonably well. Biscuit, salted meat, and wine from Cyprus or Greece. But when the winter storms make the sea impassable, or when Saracen pirates raid the shipping lanes, the supplies are cut off. The prices in the city skyrocket. The familiar, hollow ache returns to your belly. The hunger is never truly gone. It is just waiting off stage. A constant threat. The story ends with you. Years later, you are no longer a young man. Your face is leathery from the sun. Your body is a roadmap of old scars. You never went home. This strange, holy, and violent land is your home now. You stand on the walls of Jerusalem, looking out at the Judean hills. You have achieved the impossible. You have taken the holy city. You are a victor, but you are also a prisoner here, tied to these walls by your duty and by the constant, nagging worry of the next shipment of grain. You realize that your great victory was not an end to your war against famine. It was just the beginning of a new, permanent siege, one that will last for the rest of an entire kingdom's life, and for the rest of your own. And so, the story draws to a close. Let the image of that lone soldier on the walls of Jerusalem begin to soften, to dissolve into the mists of time. Let the feeling of the hot sun and the dusty wind fade away, replaced by the gentle, soothing atmosphere of your own room. The echoes of battle, the sharp pangs of hunger, the deep-seated resentments, allow them all to recede, to become distant history once more. They are stories of the past, and you are here. Now, in the comfort and safety of the present, become aware of your own body, resting comfortably. Feel the simple, profound pleasure of being well-fed, of a body at ease, untroubled by the gnawing ache of starvation. Think of the simple miracle of clean, cool water, available to you at any time. These are luxuries so immense that the man in our story could not even have conceived of them. Let a feeling of quiet gratitude for these simple, peaceful things wash over you. A gentle wave of contentment. Listen to the quiet sounds around you, the soft rhythm of your own breathing, in and out, the gentle hum of the world outside your window. These are the sounds of peace, the sounds of safety. Let each sound be a soft anchor, holding you in this moment of tranquility, pulling you gently away from the shores of wakefulness and towards the deep, calm ocean of sleep. There are no more battles to be fought, no more hardships to endure. Your only task now is to rest, to let go of the day, to let go of the story, and to allow yourself to drift into a deep, peaceful, and well-deserved slumber.